open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Hello, Kentuckiana. Welcome to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. Today we have a very interesting show where we're talking about several topics, where we'll have a little bit of discussion of some recent Supreme Court rulings. We'll talk about and finish our discussion on Iran, last week's show on Monday. I think that was 6/22. We had a full show on Iran talking about all the history and context for our current conflict. We'll try to finish up that discussion and talk about some of the recent events and, developments within the Trump administration. We'll also have a long discussion of flock cameras and other types of surveillance technology and how you need to be on the lookout for protecting your own Fourth Amendment rights, because they are being systematically whittled away iteratively, and so that's the most dangerous. If there's a dramatic change in the way that your rights are protected, most people will get up in arms. But when it's a very slow and incremental creep, it's harder to keep things in focus. Okay, before we get into that, I want to make sure that all of our listeners and viewers are aware of all of the options that they have to see or listen to this show. The first thing is, if you want to text into the show, I'll do my best to try to integrate that into the show. But even if I'm not able to integrate it into the show, I guarantee that I'll read those comments that you send in. You can text that text line at 502-571-0970. That's 502-571-0970. You can also text the word give to that line, and a reply will be sent to your phone that has a link to kyvoice.org. That's kyvoice.org. If you go to that website, up in the top right-hand corner, there's an option to donate to our show. We are listener-supported, and it does take some funds to have all of these different listening and viewing options. So I encourage you to, set up a monthly gift or even a one-time gift to try to support conservative talk and opinion on our Louisville airways. Now, you are probably listening to us right now on WGTK. That's 970 AM in the Louisville and Collier County area. We also are doing a live stream on both Facebook and YouTube. Go to the Kentucky's Voice channel on either of those options. If you go to YouTube and search for the Kentucky's Voice channel, you also can find archives under either the live tab or the video tabs of some of our past shows. And I encourage you to look up some of these topics that you're interested in, some of the hosts that you're interested in, and basically find out more about the topics. We also are rebroadcast on television. If you have Spectrum TV as your cable provider, you can go to WBNA, which is channel 21, at either 12:30, 4, or 7 p.m. tonight, and you can see a video rebroadcast of this on your TV. I encourage you to make use of any of those different options. All right, so today we're going to be talking about lots of issues. I want to make a personal note. If you are watching this video, you'll see that I have a pin on my lapel that's kind of in the shape of a ribbon. That's an ALS ribbon. I had a personal friend a few weeks ago that died of ALS. ALS is Lou Gehrig's disease. That's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a very rare neurological disorder that basically, over the course of a couple of years, Takes away your ability to move, to speak, eventually to swallow, and to breathe. It just came out today, this morning, that the former All-Pro running back for the Tennessee Titans by the name of Chris Johnson has been diagnosed with ALS himself and has lost the ability to speak. So my hope is that through that tragedy, some good will come out of that. There will be some people that are interested in giving to support ALS research and try to end this horrendous disease that's crippling. But I did want to make that as a personal note. Please join us after the break as we pick up some discussion of the Constitution as well as the Iran situation. All right. Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. You're listening to 970 AM WGTK, the best option that you have, frankly, to hear conservative talk and opinion on Louisville area radio, dealing with both local, state, and occasionally national and international issues. If you want to hear that, make sure that you go to kyvoice.org and try to financially support the continuation of the program. Okay. The first thing that I want to get into is a somewhat funny situation that occurred. And so we'll open up with a little lighthearted video. Thomas Massie, who many people are aware of, he's our U.S. congressman from the 4th District who just lost his primary. He was in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure you've seen videos like this where a reporter tries to come up and confront someone on the street. And so one of the reporters for Fox Digital decided that they wanted to confront Thomas Massie and talk about, rumors from an ex-girlfriend that were used at the very end of the primary election. Nobody actually cared. I don't actually think that did anything in the election. But nevertheless, like Fox Digital has decided that they want to continue to try to run a smear campaign against Thomas Massie. And let me show you how he handled the situation and what I think was pretty brilliant.
We clear up the stuff your ex is saying about you with the NDA, that you pressured her to sign an NDA for wrongful termination. What is that true? What's she saying about you?
Who are you with?
With Fox Digital.
It's all false.
And what she said about you and Boebert having an intimate relationship?
It's all false.
Why do you think she's out there saying it? Was it because of the primary, ahead of the primary? What do you think is motivating it?
When did you all become a tabloid? Seriously, dude.
Well, no, I just thought I would give you a chance to respond because you've never been able to tell your side of the story, that's all. But anything you could say.
So let me ask you. I heard that you like gay porn. Is that true?
Congressman, I just want to give you a chance. Your side.
I'm giving you a chance to give me your side.
I'm not going to get into
Are you a real news organization or not? No, come back, man. All you got to say is you don't like it. That you haven't been to those websites.
Of course I don't. Of course I don't like it.
Really?
But thank you.
That's not what I heard.
Thank you for your time. Just giving you a chance to respond. That's all.
And you're with Fox?
But thank you.
Is that a real news organization?
Yep.
Is this what you do for a living, man?
Congressman, okay, thank you.
Okay, so these paparazzi people that go around and just basically ask inflammatory questions that really have no basis in reality, and try to force Congress people to get on the record, and this goes for the state legislature or the Louisville Metro Council to much less extent, but it happens to them too. This is one example of where the congressperson actually flipped it around and started asking provocative questions of the reporter himself. So I thought that was humorous. That was kind of all over social media this weekend. All right, some other recent happenings before we really get into the meat of the show. The Supreme Court has made several rulings over the last week and a half that have had a big impact on several things that we've actually mentioned before. So I believe this morning or maybe yesterday, the Supreme Court released a ruling that basically said it is not unconstitutional for a state to accept ballots even after Election Day. So we know the situation in California, for example, where much of the election is conducted through mail-in ballots, and as long as the ballots are postmarked by the day of the election, they will continue receiving and then counting votes for up to 2 weeks, I think, after the election. Now, I would probably prefer that we require that elections, all the ballots be in by Election Day so that the actual Election Day is meaningful. The Supreme Court in a 5-4 ruling determined that, however, is not a constitutional requirement. So if the state decides that they want to accept these ballots that came in late, as long as they were postmarked by Election Day, they should count those. So I don't love that ruling, but it is what it is. For our longtime listeners or our regular listeners, we had a show on June 15th. If you want to go to our YouTube channel, Kentucky's Voice, go to the live tab and find our show from 6:15. We did an entire show on marijuana policy. One of the big deterrents for people exercising their now state right to pursue a medical cannabis license. If they have a qualifying medical condition, they can receive medical cannabis. One of the consequences of that, however, is that they no longer are able to exercise their Second Amendment rights and have a firearm if they are considered a marijuana user. The Supreme Court last week, I guess this was a week and a half ago, right after our show, they basically came down with a ruling that said that is unconstitutional. If a state were to want to ban a person from having a firearm while they are actively on marijuana, that's a possibility if they want to do that. But you can't just say because a person is a marijuana user generally that they no longer are able to have a firearm. So I regard that as actually a great ruling. It expands and protects our Second Amendment rights. And I think it's just, in general, it's just the rational position to take. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and get into our show. If you watched our show on, I guess it was 6/22, we did an entire show on the history of Iranian and American U.S. relations, as well as the relationships, at least since World War II, with the surrounding Arab states as well as Israel. And we kind of saw the background on what led eventually to this Iran conflict / war, whatever you want to call it, military engagement, whatever the preferred nomenclature of the day is. We, at the very last segment, we really got into the Memorandum of Understanding, Operation Midnight Hammer, the claim by the Trump administration, including this year in the State of the Union address, that they had obliterated the nuclear program for Iran. And then not long afterward, we then decided to go in and start bombing Iran again on the pretext, principally, that we were trying to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. Those two things don't really square. So let me go ahead and show a video of the changing justifications for the war under the Trump administration. If we can play that video.
With a memorandum of understanding in place between the U.S. and Iran, we wanted to take a look at where things stand on some of the goals the Trump administration laid out for this conflict. President Trump said the night the war began, the U.S. would, quote, raise their missile industry to the ground. The U.S. has heavily targeted Iran's missile stockpile and factories during the war, but as of Wednesday, President Trump appeared to be changing his tune.
I'm saying that if other countries have them, it's a little bit unfair for them not to have some. A ballistic missile is not the same thing as what we're talking about when we talk nuclear.
Another goal the president laid out the night the war began was regime change, telling Iranian citizens, quote, take over your government. A month into the war, Trump claimed the goal was achieved by the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And on Tuesday, he changed his perspective on the objective again, saying, quote, I never cared about regime change. A week into the war, President Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. The memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran doesn't mention anything about Iran unconditionally surrendering, and it's not clear if a longer deal will either. Last month, the president stated there wouldn't be any easing of sanctions for Iran, but in this new MOU, it says the U.S. will lift all sanctions. The Trump administration said this will only happen as long as Iran demonstrates compliance with a longer-term deal. Finally, there's the issue of what the president refers to as nuclear dust, or the enhanced uranium stockpile in Iran. In April, Trump said the U.S. will get all of the material out and specifically said it was part of the negotiations. Well, the MOU pushes a decision on how the nuclear material will be handled to the next 60 days of peace talks. President Trump added this week he doesn't think it's an urgent task.
Iran will be just fine. What's happening is that at an appropriate time, there's no rush at all. We have cameras from space on it. We know everybody that goes there, which is like nobody.
CBS News national security.
Okay, so just from that clip, you've seen as the war has progressed, and now we're in the midst of a ceasefire that was just broken, and now it's back on, and nobody really knows where the status of almost anything is because we get conflicting news all the time. We saw different positions from the early part of the war to now the end part of the war, or ceasefire, hopefully the end part, where the administration has basically had the opposite messaging from early in the war on missiles, regime change, whether or not there's a requirement for an unconditional surrender, whether there's going to be sanctions relief provided or not, whether we have to have access to the uranium stockpile that Iran has had, whether there's going to be inspections, whether they can have any sort of domestic nuclear program. Basically, every justification for the war that we came up with, there's been mixed messaging on that general topic. And this comes basically on the heels of this memorandum of understanding and the difference with the JCPOA, which we had reached under the Obama administration. If we could put that graphic up with a comparison of the JCPOA and the memorandum of understanding. So you can see Trump basically withdrew the United States from that JCPOA agreement that was reached under Obama, calling it one of the worst deals ever. It had conditions such as seeking that the JCPOA had Iran already saying that they would never seek to develop or to acquire nuclear weapons, that they would put a moratorium on uranium enrichment, that routine nuclear inspections would happen by the IAEA over the next 15 years, and that there would be some relief in sanctions. Now, the conditions of the current memorandum of understanding state that Iran is also not going to procure or develop nuclear weapons. There's going to be an end to military operations. The Strait of Hormuz is going to be open for safe passage, but only for 60 days. Okay. All right. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice on WGTK 970 AM. You may also be listening to us and watching us on YouTube or on Facebook at the Kentucky's Voice channel. Go ahead and find those options if you want. You can see a rebroadcast of this on channel 21 if you have Spectrum cable at 12:30, 4, and 7 tonight. I welcome you to entertain any of those options and trying to access our programming. So at the very end of the last segment, we got into some differences between the JCPOA and the Memorandum of Understanding. JCPOA was signed in 2015 through international consensus under the Obama administration before we withdrew it. We withdrew from it in 2018 under President Trump. The Memorandum of Understanding, which is a proposal for a 60-day ceasefire that we are in the middle of now, leading to a peace deal with Iran. Compared to that JCPOA, this Memorandum of Understanding basically doesn't have much in terms of specifics in terms of the nuclear weapons program or the domestic nuclear program in Iran. That JCPOA had a 15-year framework of international inspections. That's not mentioned at all in the Memorandum of Understanding. And so the Memorandum of Understanding is just basically a ceasefire proposal with some economic relief to the Iranians rather than a comprehensive nuclear accord. So let me go ahead and focus in on that question of the nuclear weapons program and that as a justification for Iran. There's a reason that people are quite skeptical of we can't let the Iranian government get a nuclear weapon as justification for us even being involved in this war. And that's because this is what we've heard for the last 33 years, actually. The last 33 years, this is what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying about the Iranian nuclear program and the potential of them getting a nuclear weapon.
You've probably heard this line before.
Iran has never given up its quest for nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them.
That's because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying this for more than 30 years, claiming Iran is close to having
nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Atomic bombs.
In 1992, as a member of parliament, Netanyahu addresses the Knesset. He says, within 3 to 5 years, we can assume that Iran will become autonomous in its ability to develop and produce a nuclear bomb. 3 years later, in his book Fighting Terrorism, he repeats the same time frame, 3 to 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fast forward to 2002. Netanyahu testifies before a U.S. congressional committee actively calling for the invasion of Iraq.
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran.
The invasion happens months later. No weapons of mass destruction are found in Iraq. This is a fragment of a 2009 U.S. State Department cable released by WikiLeaks. Netanyahu tells members of Congress that Iran is 1 or 2 years away from being capable of developing nuclear weapons.
They're online.
It's 2012, and Netanyahu is holding up his infamous cartoon bomb at the UN General Assembly.
By next spring, at most by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
And now, 33 years after Netanyahu's first so-called imminent warning, Israel attacks Iran.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year.
That's despite the U.S. Director of National Intelligence saying Iran isn't building a nuclear weapon months earlier.
Iran lied.
But for Netanyahu,
Big time.
The slogan has been the same for decades. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news.
So that was basically video clips. I think, what was the time on it? Basically 2.5 minutes of extremely tightly edited clips of Benjamin Netanyahu testifying, including in front of the U.S. Congress, that Iran was anywhere from 3 to 5 years, then down to year, then down to months, down to weeks away from Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon. There's no clear evidence that that was actually the case or that was the intent of the Iranians. And so let me now go to a clip of Joe Kent, who was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center until he recently resigned from that position, essentially in protest of the Iran war, and what he believes that the Iranian and what the intelligence community believes the Iranian nuclear program was about.
So basically, the intelligence community does not agree on a lot consistently, and this is where the DNI does come in. And under the DNI, we're getting like way down in the weeds here, but also under the DNI, there's the National Intelligence Council. National Intelligence Council is supposed to be basically the final word from the analytic community. It has people from basically every single aspect of the IC, and they'll come together and they'll put together the finalized report. And so the IC actually had been in consensus, which is hard to do, for quite some time, for almost basically since 2004, 2005-ish, that Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon. And this isn't because the Iranians were too dumb, they couldn't do it. It's not because of that. It's not because they lacked the capability. Iran's strategic plan, basically, when it came to nuclear proliferation, was that they weren't going to get the Gaddafi treatment and they weren't going to get the Saddam treatment. They were going to thread the needle and basically have the ability and show the world they had the ability to develop a nuclear weapon, but that they didn't have one, basically to be a breakout state. So they saw what happened with Gaddafi in Libya, when Gaddafi in Libya, after we invaded Iraq, said, okay, I'll give you guys everything I have that could, let me put together a nuclear weapon. I'll do exactly what you say. And we all saw what happened a few years later with Gaddafi. Saddam kind of did something very similar where he was coy about it. He never quite came out. He came out towards the very end and said, I don't have any WMD. But there was a while there where he was kind of making it seem like maybe I could have one. He had done some development. So the Iranians watched all this and they came up with a very pragmatic kind of thread the needle. I call it the Goldilocks solution. You don't give it all up, but you don't quite make one. And then that gives you a big bargaining chip. The supreme leader also codified this with a religious fatwa. And when I bring up a fatwa, people say, oh my gosh, you believe Shia fatwas. I'm like, actually, I don't believe Shia fatwas. In the intelligence community, it wasn't my job to believe anything that anyone ever said, but it was our job to check in and see what actions they were taking. And we saw the Ayatollah and we saw a lot of senior members of the Iranian government, many of whom have been killed now, basically hold this and say, this is our pragmatic solution. We don't want to develop a nuclear weapon. So when Tulsi presented that intelligence, she was basically just saying, this is the consensus of the IC.
Okay, so just to summarize that clip, Joe Kent essentially said it was the near consensus of the American intelligence community that Iran was not imminently going to acquire a nuclear weapon, that wasn't even their intent. Their intent was to basically play a game with the West in which they remained within range of developing one as a deterrent. And he tied it into some other incidents where the United States government went in and took out leaders of other countries, most notably Gaddafi. So in Libya, Omar Gaddafi basically announced that he wasn't going to develop a nuclear program, and the U.S. eventually went in and had him removed. And basically, Libya is now a failed state with no competent leadership at all. And that isn't to say that Gaddafi was a great leader. He was basically a dictator that kept Libya from internal turmoil, but also did that through repression and suppression. So I'm not a cheerleader for Gaddafi, but the U.S. and the most recent example was in Venezuela, has shown the willingness to go out and take out leaders of countries that do not possess nuclear weapons. The argument was that the intelligence community of the United States felt that while Iran was enriching uranium, they weren't doing it in the hopes of acquiring a nuclear weapon. It was in hopes of being close enough that it served as a deterrence from the U.S. or other powers coming in and taking out the leadership of the country. Okay, join us after the break. We'll have a little coverage of that and then talk about FLOC. All right. So super early in this next clip. All right, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson of the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. You're listening on 970 AM WGTK. Again, I encourage you to go to our YouTube or Facebook pages. Those are Kentucky's Voice. Just do that search on either YouTube or Facebook, and you'll be able to find some past clips from this show. You can also rewatch this on Channel 21 if you have Spectrum Cable at 12:30, 4, and 7 p.m. All right. Let me go ahead and continue our discussion. In the last segment, we talked a little bit about the changing goals as well as some of the false claims about the Iranian nuclear program, at least as viewed by our intelligence community. We saw at the very end a clip by Joe Kent, who was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and his assertion that the intelligence community of the United States felt that Iran was not meaningfully progressing in their ability to have a nuclear weapon, especially after Operation Midnight Hammer essentially took out 3 bases that the Iranians were using to enrich uranium. Okay, so where are we now? Where do we stand in this war? Let me go ahead and show a clip of a news reporter that had a telephone conversation with Donald Trump about the war and what he sees as, where we're at as we head forward, what's next in this war. So this is a clip from David Sanger of the New York Times, who Trump had called and had a discussion with.
Well, on Sunday, I was in London. My phone rang at about 9:30 at night, and it was President Trump from the White House residence. It's his 80th birthday, and he was in clearly a good mood, a celebratory mood. The Iranians and the United States were right on the verge of electronically signing an agreement opening up the Strait of Hormuz and ending the American blockade on Iranian ports. We haven't yet seen the full text of it. But let's remember, the strait's closing was not a cause of the war. It was a result of the war. So all this does is bring us back to where we were. What the second, and I think far more important, agreement will be about is starting off a negotiation on the nuclear program. Now, the president wanted to talk about the 4 pillars of the nuclear program that will be addressed in this follow-on negotiation. The most important one is the disposal of Iran's 11 tons or so of nuclear material, including a half a ton that is enriched to nearly bomb-grade levels. We talked a little bit about a moratorium on future enrichment and a bit about the dismantlement of nuclear facilities, though he didn't go into any detail about whether he was going to insist that Iran give up all of its facilities. And we talked about inspections, what he called policing of any site in the country that the U.S. deemed necessary. When I asked him how he would react if the Iranians just dragged out this next set of negotiations, tried to run it to the end of his presidency, he said, well, of course, he could always restart military action. But he also said if the Iranians don't do this, then the United States, acting as something of a mercenary force, would come in and patrol the Middle East, but only in return for 20% of all of the revenues of the entire Gulf region. This would be a very different use of American power.
All right. That interview I thought was quite enlightening, actually, and it especially focused near the end towards a new threat that the Iranian regime had basically learned through this military engagement. Until this attack, the Iranian regime had never either thought or taken the initiative in order to try to use the proximity that it has to the Strait of Hormuz, basically the outlet from the Persian Gulf into the Indian Ocean that they're right by, and that they basically are the largest military power in proximity to basically charge a toll on anybody that wants to move any oil out of the Persian Gulf, especially to Asia. Iran basically determined that that was one leverage point that they could start using that they had never previously used. And so the proposal that was discussed in that conversation, apparently, with this reporter is Donald Trump said if they can't come to an agreement, then maybe the U.S. is going to take over control of that Strait of Hormuz and charge a toll themselves of 20% on anything that's coming out of there. So essentially turning the U.S. Army into a mercenary force where people pay for protection, a protection racket. All right. And another aspect of the Memorandum of Understanding that got a lot of publicity was this $300 billion fund to help with the reconstruction of Iran. Now, initially, people thought maybe this was coming directly from the U.S. taxpayer. It seems more likely that it will be coming indirectly from the U.S. taxpayer, where the U.S. provides funding for various Gulf states, and then they use their own money. Money's always fungible. It can be moved around. They use money that they otherwise were going to use for whatever the U.S. is giving them to put it into a fund to help with the rebuilding and economic development of Iran. Now, I'm not the only one that's skeptical of this arrangement. Here's a image of Bill Ackman, a hedge fund manager, a very famous one in New York City, basically questioning the viability of this strategy. Let me read that. I don't understand who is going to invest in this $300 billion reconstruction fund for Iran. The U.S. is not going to do it. And why would the Qataris or any other country in the Middle East that was just attacked by Iran invest one penny to support Iran's reconstruction? Most of the damage inflicted on Iran was directed at military targets. Why would anyone want to help Iran rebuild its military capabilities? Even if the funds were limited to humanitarian related infrastructure, if there is such a thing, money's fungible, and we know that the first freed up dollar is going to go to rebuild Iran's ballistic and nuclear capabilities. What am I missing? I agree, Bill. I don't know. I don't know who would fund this. It doesn't make any sense to me, but we'll see how it all works out. Now, very recently, this past weekend, and I guess earlier in the week also, Iran basically attacked a Korean vessel that was leaving the Persian Gulf. I believe it had some oil on it. I don't know if it was an oil tanker, but they attacked a Korean ship that was leaving the Persian Gulf. In response, the United States attacked various military targets, which apparently there are some that are around in Iran. But before the stock market could open, President Trump made sure to announce, we're back to ceasefire, so don't sell your stocks. So it's all just a mess. Here's my general summary of the Iran war. The first is don't tear up an agreement like the JCPOA until you have a better one. All right? Why would we tear up any agreement that put restrictions on Iran's nuclear program when we didn't have a replacement for that agreement? And in the end, I think whatever agreement we wind up with, it's going to be a very marginal improvement on the JCPOA, if it is any improvement at all. The best case, we should have just avoided Iran. Now we're going to have to worry with how friendly the new government that gets installed is going to be to the U.S., and all indications are not very friendly. The other result is this actually had the unintended consequences of alerting Iran to their ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. Now we have another thing to deal with in the Middle East of trying to make sure that oil can flow out of the Persian Gulf without Iran messing with oil vessels there. All right. Now, so far, and I hope this continues, the worst case scenario would be us putting any significant ground presence, but especially 1 million soldiers, let's say, of the U.S. military in Iran. That would be a horrendous disaster. It would just cost us massive amounts more of blood and treasure. For what are we accomplishing? It's not at all clear, and it doesn't appear that the Trump administration is clear, based on the fact of Trump himself basically moving the goalposts repeated times on almost every one of the justifications for the war. There's no credible evidence that Iran was anywhere close to a nuclear bomb or actually intended to make one, and that's not according to me. That's according to apparently our own intelligence services. So why is that a win? The fact that we get an agreement that says they don't want to make a nuclear weapon when they had already said, both in 2003 and in the JCPOA, that they did not intend to make a nuclear weapon. We haven't really moved the ball forward on that. And then a bad and at best mediocre a deal is what we've wound up with. That's better than the alternative, as I mentioned, that worst case scenario, but why would we want them restarting things like their ballistic missile program or to start again even their domestic nuclear enrichment plan? Maybe that's one thing that can come out of it, is we at least put an end to their desire to build long-range ballistic missiles and also to have a domestic nuclear program. Okay, that's where I am on the war. I hope it all gets sorted out. I'm not optimistic. I don't think we should have gotten into it. Hopefully we can get out of there, even if it is with a deal that isn't all that great. And I think that's probably the most likely scenario. All right, the rest of the show, especially our last segment that's coming up, but the last 2 minutes of this, I want to talk about a more local issue, although this has actually become a national issue. There are many jurisdictions in the United States that are starting to expand access to a company called Flock. And what Flock does is they make license plate readers. They are solar-powered cameras that capture the license plate of any car that drives by them, and they filter that into a database with what direction, what time, what location that vehicle went by that camera. Now, on itself, it seems fairly innocuous. I don't really want a camera capturing my car all the time, but nevertheless, I'm on a public roadway. I get that there isn't an expectation that people can't see my license plate. So let me go ahead before we get into the next segment and read the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and why this is a risk and why I'm much more concerned about what's going to come next very quickly. The Fourth Amendment, if we can put that graphic up. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons and the things to be seized. Okay, after the break, we're going to talk about what Flock cameras are, how many of them there are in the Louisville area and including in the collar counties. They are less prominent in those collar counties, but many of them have started to really embrace Flock technology. What's the good part? Do I see them as an actual violation of the Fourth Amendment quite yet, or am I more concerned about the thing that's coming next? Join us after the break. All right. Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. In this segment, we're going to start talking about flock cameras. We may get into some other things like Ring doorbell services, some of the newer flock cameras that are called Condor, which actually are able to track people or objects, and then even maybe another company called Leonardo, which is really fairly nefarious. I'm not sure how much of those others we're going to get into, but we're definitely going to address flock cameras in this segment. So let me go ahead and start off with, what is a flock camera? They're basically, you have probably seen one and not even paid a lot of attention to it. It's basically a camera that's on the roadside. It's got a big solar panel on the top of it and usually a black camera right underneath it that's pointed towards the roadway. And it basically catalogs the time, date, location. It may catalog the model of car. I'm not sure on that, but it certainly catalogs the license plate number of any car that's going. It also clocks the speed that the cars are going. Currently in state law, it's not legal to assess traffic tickets based on those flock cameras, although that is within the capabilities of them. So be on the lookout. Make sure we don't expand the services past that. So how widespread are these things? Well, it's surprising to me how widespread they really are in Jefferson County. In Oldham County, I believe there's somewhere between 4 and 8 of these things that have been approved by the fiscal court to what I would call spy on cars that are going by certain locations within the county. In Louisville, however, they're far more extensive. As of early 2026, LMPD says that they're operating around 240 flock ALRP cameras. There's apparently, there are also some additional shared cameras that have been put up by the University of Louisville, by the smaller cities in Jefferson County, by homeowners associations, and by businesses. All told, I believe that LMPD's system has access to somewhere around 600 different cameras to, again, I would characterize it as spy on cars that are going by various locations in the county. That information is fed into a database that is then searchable. They can find out what are the license plate numbers and therefore the car owners of vehicles that have traveled all over the county, where they were, when they were there. The city has been aggressively expanding this, and this is with the approval of both Democrat and Republican Metro Council members and public officials. The biggest supporters of this tend to be, and the biggest supporters of these things that have influence tend to be police officers or sheriff's departments. They want another tool so that they can determine who is where, when, so that they can maybe potentially track down someone that has committed a crime just by trying to identify which vehicles were in the area at the time of a crime. All right. Sounds somewhat innocuous. There are many problems with it, however. The first is 99% of the people that are being captured and having their information recorded into these databases and therefore are part of the searches have done nothing wrong whatsoever. You know, we're trying to catch a small handful of people by collecting information on everybody. So in general, that's not a good prescription for protection of constitutional rights. Now, the Supreme Court in general has found these things to be constitutional. I don't want to overstate the case. Given that this is a public roadway, they have said that there is no presumption that the person has privacy in terms of, you know, their license plate being exposed to a camera that's on a public roadway. However, it's a creep. And the question becomes, when does this become an outright and unequivocal violation of the Constitution? And there are many things that are technically legal or constitutional that still violate the spirit of the Constitution. So whether or not this is technically legal, and I understand the argumentation, I don't even necessarily disagree with the foundation for that argument that these should be legal. But nevertheless, it certainly, if you've got cameras that are spying on anybody that goes out in public, where does it stop? Do we do facial recognition software? You don't have a presumption that your face can't be seen when you go out in public. Your conversations. Oh, you were speaking in public, so therefore, if we have a microphone everywhere, can we record everyone's conversations that they're having outside of their own house? And is that something that that should be permitted? So you can see how there's a slippery slope, and we can get into basically the public monitoring of anything that you do when you're outside of your house and this is made possible only by technological developments, which also necessitate the use of these massive data centers. That's a topic we're not going to get into for today, about how these all tie into data centers. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and show a clip. This is an interesting clip from a podcaster, an investigative reporter who was basically trying to find out information about the company that runs the most prominent of these types of license plate readers, and that is Flock Safety is the name of the company. So can we go ahead and show that clip?
We visited the Flock headquarters, and it turns out they had moved, and there's no signage on the building. The initial mission was to go there. We were going to film all of the license plates, which for those not familiar, Flock Safety is a license plate reader camera system that your city council or your local sheriff votes in. And the argument is, hey, it helps us track violent criminals. And we've seen it in action with the U.S. Marshals, where there's a guy on the run for, a home invasion, and they use it to track him to his house. They move in, they arrest him, guy off the street. So there is positive use applications with Flock Safety, but it's kind of like data centers where these things are creeping into our cities without us really wanting them there. Like the polls I put on Instagram and YouTube were both at about 90% no, I don't want Flock in my city. So the exercise, we were going to film the employee license plates. Then we were going to go to Ben Jordan's house, run it through his algorithm. He made this little software program where we were going to track each license plate, and then it shows all the information that you can get from looking up someone's license plate. And it's a pretty revealing exercise. And so then the second thing we were going to do is put them under surveillance. And so we went to their first headquarters, no signage on the building, completely anonymous. They moved out, and we had a little interaction with their security. They called the cops on us. Boom. We found their next location. We went there, also nondescript building, no signage up front. And we were stopped by the doorman on the first floor. And then, yes. And then the last one, we went to their drone headquarters, where that's part of what they're going to do is like a first responder. They send out a drone to the scene that's surveilling as soon as something happens, which again could have positive use applications, no doubt about it. But we go to their drone headquarters, and it's a construction company is what the front looks like. And so we look around this entire huge building, nothing says Flock. And so what we do, we had an old Flock camera that these tech guys got off eBay. We had my camera guys.
Can we pull up what that looks like, Beef?
Yeah,
so
they're building.
Yeah.
It might not even be listed. That's
and the
thing.
cameras.
And this is part of the point, is they're one of the biggest surveillance companies in the country, yet they obviously hold privacy as a really high regard.
Right.
And so a lot of people see cameras like this in their city. So anyways, we started filming their employees, and when they would pull up in their car, and I'd be like, hey, sir, just want to let you know you're under surveillance, but don't worry, it's for your safety. And they were all spooked, and they get away. And I was like running with their car with the camera. And then another employee comes up, and I'm like, hey, sir, do you work for Flock? He's like, Flock, never heard of it. What's that? I'm actually for this construction company. I'm like, okay, probably not, but okay. Then the police come in, they box our car in from leaving the parking lot. And even people in that business area that were trying to just go to work, they held them there. And they're like, no, you got to talk with this guy before you leave. And I'm like, so are you detaining me? We have a showdown with the police where they wrongfully are just keeping me there and not answering my questions. Anyways, we talked to the Flock guy, and he's like, you know what? I felt very unsafe. I said, sir, did you feel unsafe because we were filming you? And he's like, yes. I'm like, like, come on now.
Shoes on the other foot now, huh, partner?
Yes, and I don't know when this episode is coming out, but there's a chance that Flock is going to let us come back to their headquarters and actually talk to them. And I do believe Flock is a yin and yang. I don't want to just portray them as this evil company, but I think what a lot of people can get concerned about with Flock is, one, the scope creep. So they initially tell you that they're coming in to track license plates, which, by the way, can be used poorly. Like any powerful technology, it's like the Ring in the Lord of the Rings. It depends on who's holding it, whether it's good or evil. It's not the technology itself. But cops have been known to follow their exes or stalk people using it.
Oh, no.
But the scope creep is this. Now, I think they just did a software update where now it can listen to audio. And so once these cameras are in, just like with your phone, there's a automatic update that no one voted for, and 3 or 4 city council members approved just to put them in for the first scope creep. And now, boom, now it's audio. Now it's facial. And I think that the slippery slope that we are all worried about is, one, how much of this data would you ever sell? And two, if our government becomes even more tyrannical and oppressive, how can this system be now weaponized with, all it takes is one event to happen where all of a sudden nationwide, now for safety, we have to bring in the Flock system and all the other competitors because there's.
All right. So that clip, I think there are many very interesting parts of that clip. I think the most interesting for me was the pushback by the Flock safety employees on someone capturing them on camera and capturing their license plates on camera, and then saying it was about their safety, and the pushback that said that made them feel unsafe. All right. So I think the biggest issue that people have with the Flock system is, once all this infrastructure is in place, and by the way, these particular Flock cameras are either part of the Falcon or Sparrow models of Flock cameras. We'll talk in 1 second about the Condor models. But once all this infrastructure gets into place, let's say you have so many of these Flock cameras, we've got over 240 with access to up to about 600 for the LMPD already. Once you have a high enough density of concentration, you can go into that database, put together some basic software, and you can track the movement of a person throughout the whole city at all times. Now, let me go ahead and show this last clip. This is an example of how this can be extended to Ring doorbells. Many people have Ring doorbells. So this is a feature.
Pets are family. But every year, 10 million go missing. And the way we look for them hasn't changed in years. Until now. One post of a dog's photo in the Ring app starts outdoor cameras looking for a match. Search Party from Ring uses AI to help families find lost dogs. Since launch, more than a dog a day has been reunited with their family. Be a hero in your neighborhood with Search Party. Available to everyone for free right now. Join the neighborhood at ring.com.
So you can see, under the justification that maybe we'll be able to find your lost dog, we're going to use people's personal Ring camera doorbells that are front-facing and capturing everything that's happening in front of their house to track the location of a dog. Why can't that be used to track some person? That's the danger.